Hi, this is Pure Love,
Episode 7.
This episode is going to be on violence. And so the question comes in from Jamie. But before that, we're going to talk about a little bit about what pure love is.
Well, basically, pure love would be honest conversation or dialogue between child or adolescent, youth, however you want to say it, and guardian parent about sex, sexuality, just everything it encases, and just how we feel that it's a lifelong growth process between the both of you, not just, one and done conversation, that it's a constant journey.
Right. And it is, as I often say, I think it's like relationship building.
It is.
How we have relationship with one another. I'm her parent, and more specifically her mother. Although I'm transgender, I strongly identify as a mother. And this is kind of like it's been like our model, like things that we talked about when she was growing up. I was sort of the weirdo when I was raising her because we were having a lot of deep conversations and I was sharing a lot of stuff with her. A lot of people did not approve of that. And in hindsight, I think it was the best thing I could have ever done between us. So this question, like I said, comes in from Jamie. And Jamie asks, how do you talk about violence when kids are little? Lots of parents whose kids are shielded from violence feel like it's robbing them of their innocence, and parents whose kids are exposed to the violence feel like it's overwhelming them. So I think it's the same question as what's the appropriate age? When can someone talk about violence? First I want to talk about violence, the breadth of violence. So violence is, when I'm thinking about violence, I'm thinking about sexual violence, I'm thinking about physical violence, I'm thinking about violence by the police, state violence. There's a lot of forms of violence, so I think we need to name those things. And those pieces of violence shift depending on who you are in the world. If you are a person of color, specifically if you're black, if you're trans, if you're queer,
If you're a woman,
if you're poor, if you're a person with a disability, violence kind of lives with you in a different way. You engage in it in a different way. So I think that for me, I think raising you the idea that I could actually shield you from the conversation of violence was actually preposterous to me. Yeah, because we were poor on welfare. I was an independent parent, out as a lesbian at the time. I have a child who's female, dark skin. Yeah, so there's a lot there, right? There's a lot. And so those conversations for me were vital. Were vital for her to know how the world is. Now, the ways in which we talk about those things are really important, right? Because we don't want to terrify,
no,
but we do want to give some information. I don't know if you want to say anything about that. Do you remember the conversations that I've had with you around race and racism and sexism?
because I know you kind of broke it down in the basic sense of it, how sometimes people don't like you because of this reason, and something very basic. But so I was always aware that there are people who don't agree with the way other people are living or who they are as a person.
Right.
And I feel like because of the work that you do and has done, that I've always been not exposed to violence, we live in a crazy neighborhood where the death rate is this, but in a sense that I was always aware that violence was always unfortunately a part of the world, and that there's always instances of violence. And when you go to school too, anything you learn in history class, it all has to do with violence.
Right.
So it's And it's always against another group of people or a marginalized group of people. So it's like you already have that idea in your head, like, we don't like these people, so we're going to hurt them.
But that looks a lot different, right? Like, it's interesting that you say that, like, when you go to school and you learn about history, like, that violence is different because it's from the state and government, right? We're talking about, like, war and things like that. That's not seen as particularly violent. It's seen as a necessary evil, I guess. So it's not categorized the same way as if something would be categorized in, I don't know, a black neighborhood. What happens in a black neighborhood? What's that thing that people say, like, when white people are together, it's a rally. When people of color are together,
it's a riot.
It's a riot, right? So things are viewed very, very differently.
Yeah, and also in the context of violence, it's how, not even just, like, outwardly, like, sometimes it's not even about, like, how am I'm trying to word this the right way, like when it comes to people of color and what we do or just how we are together or being around each other can be seen as a form of violence to outsiders.
Yes.
So sometimes us just being black and being loud is scary to them, so they feel like there's a threat of violence and they might retaliate in violence or something. So there's different forms of it, even if it's not just like you think about it simply like, oh, I hit someone, that's some type of violence, or someone got raped, that's violent. But there's also, I think violence is also verbal as well as an idea can be violent. I feel like you not accepting or identifying a person as they want to be identified is a form of violence.
I like what you said too about, like, I think a lot of when I was younger, and I think it still happens today, that when there's a group of people of color walking together, they're considered a gang and a threat, right?
It's always scary. You see a group of black kids together, or, you know, like, it's different when you see different groups of people together. Like now, because, you know, that's the new flavor, when you see any type of brown, like, Arab, Muslim, Middle Eastern looking person, you see them together in traditional clothing and you're like, oh my God. Oh
right.
my God.
It's like instant fear. And that's a form of violence. It's a violence against them.
Yeah.
Because they are literally just existing.
Just walking down the street.
Existing, right. And so, I'm also thinking about, like, the world we live in today in terms of, like, the access we have online. I mean, there's so much information. We have so much access to things, right? I remember when computers first came out. I mean, only limited households had computers. You had to have money.
And if you did, it would be like this is the house computer.
Right.
Like, no now, laptops, no separate things. We all shared this computer together.
And even though it is still expensive, computers are accessible at libraries. They're accessible at community centers, at schools, right? So it's a little more accessible, and we can actually get on the internet, and if we have Wi-Fi on our phones. So information is out there all the time. We are actually bombarded with violence every single day.
Yeah, to add on to that, the two things that they want to shield, well, three things really, I feel like they want to shield us so much from, or that there's so much opinion on, are sex, religion, and violence. And those are the three things that are shoved down our throats every single day, especially in this country. Every movie you see, even if it's an action movie that has nothing to do with anything romantic in any sense, they will find some way to put some scantily clad woman in there just to lay on her back, and then that's her entire character. Or, like, just the violence with other countries, or showing how things are in other countries to kind of make us look better by comparison, or just showing how we're better than other people, but look how violent and uncivilized they are. So I'm like, these are images we constantly see. Oh, look how suppressed these women are. They're covered from head to toe, but don't show your breasts, so they'll think you're easy.
Right,
so it's
like these contradictions.
Everything. They're saying don't be violent, it's wrong, but then the most views on YouTube are videos of fights.
Right. So then, going back to the question, like, how do we talk to our young people about violence? And the messed up thing about it is that it's already there. Unfortunately, it is already there. The existence of violence is there. And again, depending on who you are in the world, you'll
be more exposed.
It's very apparent, right? So I think for me, as a poor independent parent, a woman at the time, queer, lesbian identified at the time, being at the margins, fearing that my daughter could be taken away from me because actually the violence that I was experiencing with her biological father, right? The physical violence on that. So there that conversation needed to happen, right? And it wasn't like be afraid of everything. Everything is scary in the world, right? It was more so a conversation in the sense of, I feel like I keep on saying the same things. It's like giving you these bits of information, but actually having you be able to form your own opinion and idea about these things, and then having a conversation about them. Rather than painting a picture of my experience, I can give a little bit of that, but I could also give. I kind of gave like, these are what some people think. This is what I think. This is what's, these are other opinions. This is what's happening. What do you think about that? Why do you think that's happening? How do you think it can change? Right. So it was not a sense of hopelessness of these are all the horrible things and that's just the way life is.
Fear wasn't involved. Not necessarily fear, but more safety and information more than making me afraid. So I won't leave the house, but just like, leave the house, but just so you know, these are things to be aware of because these are things that happen in our world.
Mm-hmm. And, that's interesting because growing up, right, my parents did not know about the sexual abuse that was happening with me growing up. And my mom and my dad, especially my mom, she was very clear about, protecting us. My mom always told us about strangers, always told us about, how to handle certain situations. And then maybe in her generation, it was more of a telling than a conversation. But I did get something out of that. And then, having that, and it was mostly about like being a girl in this world and what happens. And that was my reality, like every single day growing up, the sexual violence. And now as an adult, I can look back and name it violence, right? I think the sad thing is when we don't identify it as violence and we think it's a part of our everyday life. And that's what I thought. I thought that men touching me, calling out to
harassment,
me, what they call catcalling, all these things.
You think it's regular.
Totally normal. And I needed to learn how to navigate that normalcy, either by engaging with them or hiding from them and then being called a bitch, right?
That's always the thing, though. We always teach women or females how to prevent and avoid, but we don't teach the offenders how to not offend and how to not be violent and how to not be, how to not force yourself on someone else, how to be respectful, how to have boundaries. We never teach, because not saying that women don't rape, but majority of offenders are male, and I can guarantee you majority of these males are not being taught as men that no means no, respect people's bodies, ask, and, if you get turned down, then you just gotta keep it pushing, like they always teach us, if this happens, cross the street, tell somebody, make sure, like, yell fire, or if you see a cop, like there's all these different methods, but I'm like, it's unfortunate that we have to teach our daughters to do that when it should be teaching people to just let people live.
And I often say that too. I think that it's like a multi-pronged approach, right? It's yes, talking to those pushed to the margins about how to protect themselves possibly, right? What are the things that you can do? Getting other community members or people on the street involved to help and things. But at the same time, just like you said, we have to be having the conversations of how not to raise violent people, right? How not to raise a violent man. Because again, that word violence, violent things happen every single day, every second of the day. But most times we're not identifying those things as violent. So to me, the idea that we wouldn't have conversations about violence with our children it just doesn't make sense to me. It's a conversation that has always happened. It's about, it's from when you were little up until you were older, like how you traveled on the train, how about
be aware of my surroundings.
Exactly, not having headphones in your ears or not having the sound up.
Be in a well-lit street.
Right.
Act like I'm making a fake phone call if I feel uncomfortable. All the different methods on how to be safe. Put my keys in between my knuckles.
Right.
Things like that,
Right. And it's like, I think it is a scary thing, actually. It is. But I think we almost level it out when we are feeling that conversation is not topped off with helplessness. Rather, there's something that's giving us some power to do something, right? So I think with you, you grew up in activist circles, so it's like we were always talking about, fighting for rights and doing this stuff. So there was always some power. I remember there's a story of one time we were on the bus together in Brooklyn, and this was a scene that I put in one of my shows, Violence in Motion, and we were on the. I think you were probably, I don't know, 8, 9 even. A drunk, very, very, very drunk man got on the bus and sat next to a woman. It was a very drunk Latino man, but I sat next to this woman who was black, and literally was sexually harassing her, just very openly, getting close to her, almost touching her. The woman was obviously very uncomfortable, kind of trying to hold, and no one on the bus did anything. People were just that's not my business, right? And I spoke up. I yelled, I spoke up, I went to the bus driver, I demanded that the bus driver stop and remove this man from the bus because he was sexually harassing the woman, all of these things. And when we got off the bus, I remember you looked at me and you said, "I'm proud of you, mommy." And she was like, "I'm glad that you made that man get off the bus," right? So not only am I teaching her about the violence that happens, and she's witnessing it every single day, I showed her that I could do something about it. And on the heels of that, had a conversation about sometimes we can't always do that, right? Because it's about safety, right? So there's multiple conversations that happen around violence and how we navigate those, Yeah, sometimes we have agency to speak up, and sometimes we absolutely do not. And that's what happens sometimes, right? But this idea of that the conversation about violence isn't just a thing about parent and child, but it's like a community-wide conversation, and not just what's happening in our own communities, right? So the violence, talking about what violence looks like in other places, right? Where we are getting fed a lot of bullshit through, mainstream media about other countries, right? Having conversations about that, making some different kinds of assessments, and maybe thinking about other media outlets that are more grassroots, and doing comparison, right? I wanted you to have the ability to come up with your own assessment about things. I could tell you what I think, I could tell you what that person thinks, I could tell you what the news said, and then I'm going to ask you, what do you think, right? And I think that's a big piece of it. And at the same time, there's a lot of scary shit. What does this conversation look like when a parent is raising a trans child, right? Maybe a trans black daughter, right? Where we know that
there's layers to the stuff that child is going to have to deal with that another child would never even think about.
Right. And how year after year after year, the numbers of trans women of color, specifically black women who have been murdered, continues to rise, right? So if you're raising a trans daughter, how then do you have these conversations, right? That's a fucking horribly scary thing, right? And what are the actions that we take as parents to protect our children, and to bring awareness to all these things? So I think it's very multi-layered. It's not just a conversation. It doesn't end there. And it's not just one conversation.
Yeah, and it's you don't want to, it's not like you have to bombard them with graphic images and videos and make them afraid. The whole thing is not to create fear, but just information on how to maneuver around in this world, in this neighborhood, in this community, in your home, and just making sure that you're as safe as possible, because anything can happen. But don't live your life in fear also. You should always, throughout their lives, let them know, because they're either going to witness it or see it in a movie or something, and just know that these things happen. But you should still inform them that it's not the only thing that happens, and it's not always scary, and it's not always, you don't always have to be on your guard. Because I know at one point, because, the being a female, and especially going off to college and stuff, I know that date rape is a thing that happens there, or just rape in general, you're at a party, you're drinking. So I know for me, a good chunk of my like teen years, early 20s, and because I know so many people who are survivors, like it's ridiculous throughout my life how many people that I've met that are survivors, and it breaks my heart that it got to the point where I was like, when is it going to be my turn? Like, and how, like how would I navigate that? Because I'm like, I can't even, seriously, like I have so many friends that you would never even know that they've survived. And I'm like, if it happens all the time to all these people and all these situations, you're always just like, when is it going to happen to me? How am I going to prepare for that? What am I going to do? So that gives you that anxiety, but you don't want to live your life in fear. Because, I could walk outside and a plane part could fall and hit me, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to go outside.
Right. Yeah, it's a balance, right? And sometimes we can be strong to do that, and sometimes we can't. And that's a reality. We're humans, and but I think it's a constant conversation. And I'm reminded of a video that I saw on Facebook about, a black father talking to his, I think she was like 7-year-old daughter, maybe younger, about police violence, and actually teaching her techniques on how to not get shot by the fucking cops. And that's so sad that we have to have those conversations. But it's a reality. As as black people, it's like, it's a reality. And then the darker your skin, the worser it is, right? So it is a reality that violence has been a part of our history. It's in our DNA, unfortunately.
And it's better to have that conversation young, because I know I've spoken to some adults, like, it's becoming a part of my vocabulary now that whenever I part ways with someone, especially a person of color, I'm always like, be safe, make sure you get home okay, like, be careful. You shouldn't wait until violence happens to have the conversation.
Right. I think that's a good point. We shouldn't have to wait till that, because it is a reality, an unfortunate reality, but that conversation could be really good, and also even help with processing when violence happens. Yes, and then degrees of violence, right? Like we spoke of before, there are degrees of this, but violence is violence is violence, and so these conversations most definitely have to happen. And I think that those conversations can happen very creatively with young people, and that could happen like in terms of how hitting one another, not hitting one another, right? Making comparisons and stuff when you watch movies about violence, and dissecting that and really talking through it. I think it has to be a part of the fabric, right? Because it's there, it exists. So I think we answered in the way like the conversation must exist, and there is no cookie cutter model in which to do it. I think for some groups of people, the conversation is more immediate than others, but it's necessary. And not just the fear and hopelessness, but hope and safety plan and the idea of safer, because nothing is absolutely safe. And this is the world that we're in, bombarded by violence every day, bombarded by it. So I'd say talk about it as much as you can, in different ways that you can, and not just one time, just like the sex conversation. We need to be talking about it in multiple ways. Yeah. Yes, I hope that we answered your question.
Thank you for your question, by the way.
And we continue to ask you to send in questions so that we can answer them. And we're going to have some great shows coming up. So please keep on supporting us. We love you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. See you next time.
Next time.